Hi, and welcome back to the Retired Psychiatrist channel. This is the first of at least two videos I will be preparing on the psychology of HunterXHunter. And this first video will concentrate on the concepts of aura and NEN use. Regardless of the different arcs and the tones of the different arcs, there's a psychological depth that is consistent throughout this great anime. And that's what inspired me to prepare this series of videos. So, Hunter x Hunter, it's based on a manga by Yoshihiro Togashi. It's a shonen, and the title refers to hunters, which in the story are characters that track down treasures, rare beasts, or people. In order to become hunters, though, they need to get a license, and for that, they need to pass a hunter's exam. We're also introduced to the concept of Nen. Nen is the ability to control one's aura, and aura is the life energy that every person has. So, very early in the story, we encounter Gon, and after a meeting with Kite, he aims to become a hunter and meet his father. So, in a sense, it is Kite that sets the story into motion by introducing Gon to the concept of hunters and also serving as a link with his father. That gives Gon the motivation to start his own journey. Now, what Nen abilities each character develops they are based on the type of aura they have. And one way of discovering the type of aura is by doing what's called the water test. They put water inside a container like we see in the picture, and then they put a leaf uh, on the water, and they make their aura flow towards the container. And depending on what kind of reaction they get, it tells them what kind of aura they have. And I was blown away when the story introduced the concept that you could deduct the type of personality their character would have based on the type of aura they have. So you have this relationship between the different types of aura. You have six of them: enhancement, transmutation, emission, manipulation, conjuration, and specialization. And they are arranged in pair of opposites. So enhancement and specialization are one pair of opposites. Transmutation and manipulation is another pair of opposites. Emission and conjuration would be the last pair of opposites. One of these would be what I'm going to be called dominant function, and we'll see why I am using these terms in a minute or two. So your dominant function is determined since birth, and this is the function that you can use with 100% efficiency. In the case of an enhancer, the dominant function would be enhancement. So this character would be able to use enhancement with 100% efficiency. Now, the two adjacent functions can be developed up to 80% efficiency. In this case, transmutation and emission. I'm going to call them auxiliary functions 1. The next two functions can be developed up to 60%. In this case, conjuration and manipulation. I'm going to call them auxiliary functions 2. And last, the function opposite to the dominant function can be developed up to 40%. And I'm going to call this the neglected function. Now, specialization is the exception in the sense that it is generally 0% for anyone who's not a specialist. So if you're an enhancer, that is your dominant function, then the neglected function is going to be a specialization. You cannot develop it up to 40%. It's going to be 0% for you. But the two types of aura that are next to specialization can become uh, specialists later in life, conjurers and manipulators in this case. Now, if we see, for example, in the case of transmutation, someone who's a transmuter would be at 100% in that function, 80% in conjuration and enhancement, 60% in emission, 0% in specialization, because it's 0% for everybody who's not a specialist, except, like I mentioned, in some rare cases of conjurers and manipulators. And then manipulation, which is the opposite function or neglected function compared to transmutation, can be developed up to 40%. So that's the general concept. And when I saw this in the series, it immediately reminded me of the theory of Jungian psychological types, which is structured very similarly. And I don't know if the aura types in Hunter x Hunter were um, inspired by this, but the similarities are striking. And I wanted to share them with you, see what you guys think. So, in the case of the Jungian model of psychological types, instead of 6 functions, you have 4 functions: intuition and sensation, feeling and thinking. And they are also arranged in pair of opposites. So intuition and sensation would be one pair of opposites. Feeling and thinking would be another pair of opposites. So as we see, the structure and the dynamics are very similar to the aura types. We have 2 pairs of opposite functions. We also have a dominant function. In this example, thinking would be the dominant function, the one that's represented on top. And the dominant function is conscious. Then you have 2 auxiliary functions, in this case, intuition and sensation, which are partially conscious and partially unconscious. And then you have a neglected function, in this case, feeling, which is the opposite of the dominant function. And feeling is unconscious. The neglected function is unconscious. According to Jung, throughout life, one of the goals is the development and integration of the neglected function into consciousness. You may not be able to do that 100%, just like with aura. You may not be able to develop the neglected function 100%, but maybe you can get 20, 30, or 40%. And Jung says something similar. You can get some aspects of the neglected function into your consciousness to develop a more complete personality. Now, uh, so what do each of these mean? Jung says that sensation tells you that something exists. Thinking tells you what it is. Feeling tells you whether it's good or not, and therefore how to relate to it. And intuition tells you where the thing comes from or is going to. Why does Jung say that there are four psychological functions? He based this on his work with dreams, myths, legends, folk tales, religion, where he saw a repetition of the what he called the quaternity, the symbol of four, as a representation of the totality of the psyche. So he theorized that this was uh, telling of the fact that the psyche had a structure of four components. Then, why these four in particular? He said, you can develop a psychological type theory with any number of components and any components you choose to start. But once you determine that something exists, what is its nature, how to relate to it, and what is its essence, then where its motivation, where it's going, where it's coming from, where it's going to. You have nothing else to tell about the thing. So with these four things, it gives you a complete picture of the relationship between the subject, the person, and the object, that which the person is relating to. Now, we see that we have four psychological components or functions in Jung's theory, whereas in Hunter x Hunter we have six types of aura. Where did the other two go? You can see this in one of two ways. The first one is from the perspective of Jungian theory. Jung added an axis to the four psychological functions, and that axis was the axis of introversion and extroversion. What does that mean? Introversion and extroversion refer to what is the preferred or dominant movement of the libido in the individual. So, in Hunter x Hunter, we have the concept of the aura, life energy. In Jung, we have the concept of the libido, psychic energy. Very, very similar. If the person preferentially turns the libido towards the outside world, then he's an extrovert. If the person preferentially turns the libido towards the inside world, then he's an introvert. So if you think of the subject object relationship, the person and whatever the person is relating to, which may be another person, it may be a work of art, it may be an institution, it may be an ideology. If in that relationship the object is more important than the subject, the other is more important than the self, um, and I'm sorry, I have this inverted here. So in the case of the introvert, the subject, the person, is more important than the object. In the case of the extrovert, the object, the outside, the thing that the person is relating to, takes precedence over the subject. So that's the main difference between introvert and extrovert. I apologize about this inversion here. So let's take a look okay, so that's one thing. So we can see that in Jung's theory, we actually have six components: thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition, and then introversion and extroversion. So that's six, just like in Hunter x Hunter's model of aura types. Or you can go in the other direction and say that what happened in the Hunter x Hunter model is that you have the dominant function, the neglected function, and then there's a duplication of auxiliary functions. Instead of having one pair, you have two pairs. So either way, you can explain that discrepancy. But in terms of structure and dynamics, these are two very similar models. Now, let's see some examples of psychological types in Jung's theory. I'm going to be using this book for reference, Jung for Beginners by Maggie Hyde and Michael McGuinness. So, if the person's dominant function is thinking and he's an extrovert, in the case of an extrovert thinker, the person directs himself or herself and others according to fixed rules and principles. They are interested in reality, order, and material facts. The example they give is scientists and economists like Charles Darwin and Karl Marx. Another possible combination is someone whose dominant function is thinking, but he's an introvert. So this group formulates questions and seek to understand their own being. They neglect the world and dwell on their own ideas. An example would be philosophers, in particular Wittgenstein. In the case of someone who is an extrovert but whose dominant function is feeling, they are conventional and well adjusted to their time and society. They are concerned with personal and social success. They are changeable and into fashions. The examples they give are chat show hosts and celebrities, with specific examples of Frank Sinatra and Madonna. Someone whose dominant function is feeling, but is an introvert, are inaccessible but appear harmonious and self sufficient. They can be involved in poetry and music. They give the impression that, quote, still waters run deep, unquote. Examples would include monks, nuns, musicians, and specific historical characters would include Chopin. Now, if the dominant function is sensation, but the person is an extrovert, they would focus on external facts and practical, hard headed. They are practical, hard headed, and accept the world as it is. They enjoy life, but their sensuality can breed addictions, perversions, and compulsions. Some occupations that are typical of this combination are builders and speculators, and a specific example would be Casanova. If the person's dominant function is sensation, but he's an introvert, they feed on sense impressions and immerse themselves in their own inner sensations. They are aesthetic, unassuming, and bemused. And examples include connoisseurs and aesthetes. In the case of someone whose dominant function is intuition, but he's an extrovert, they their unconscious insight keeps them on the scent of future novelty. They are troubleshooters, charismatic leaders, but their ruthless adventuring makes them unfit for long-term stability. Typical occupations are PR people and adventurers. A specific example would be Robert Maxwell. And someone whose dominant function is intuition, but is an introvert, follow an inner vision, are daydreamers, see themselves as misunderstood geniuses struggling with a unique esoteric experience. Uh, People like mystics and poets, with a specific example of William Blake. Okay, now with that in mind, let's take a look at the different types of aura users or aura types with an example for each case and what would be their equivalent in Jungian theory. So the first type of aura is the enhancer. Using the water test, you would see that the volume of the water changes. Their abilities include using aura to increase the natural abilities of an object or their own body. In terms of their personality, they are determined and simple, Words and actions are often dominated by their feelings, not good with planning or complicated thinking. And in terms of Jungian type, this would be a typical person whose dominant function is feeling. We know that Gon is an enhancer, and in his case, he's specifically a Jungian type of an extroverted feeling. Um, and so we see that in the case of Jung, he's not very good with solving complex problems, thinking, logic. He's more of an action person going with the flow, which is typical of the extroverted feeling type of combination. Now, the second type of aura is the transmuter. What you would see on the water test is that the taste of water changes. And in terms of the dynamics of this type of aura, the person can change the property of their aura to mimic something else. In the case of Kilua, electricity. In terms of personality, they're whimsical and prone to deceit. Many are regarded as weirdos or tricksters, and they rarely reveal their true intentions. In terms of Jungian type, the dominant function here would be intuition. In the specific case of Kilua, he's introverted, so introverted intuition. Then we have the emitters. What you would see on the water test is that the color of the water changes. The dynamics of the ability, it makes it easier for them to separate their auras from their body, for example, using projectiles. In terms of their personality, they are impatient, short-tempered, and volatile. And here's you see what I think we see in the anime is that we have the four Jungian psychological functions plus introversion and extroversion, except that instead of introversion and extroversion, instead of being an axis, a different axis, it's incorporated into the psychological functions. And the emitter would be the equivalent of the extroverted. So Leoria, we know it's an emitter, and he's an extrovert. His dominant Jungian function is sensation, and he would be an extroverted sensation type in Jungian theory. Next, we have the Conjurer. In the water test, you see that impurities appear in the water. These characters can create a physical object out of their own aura, for example, chains. In terms of their personality, they're high strung, serious, stoic, and cautious. They are observant and logical and good at analysis. In terms of the Jungian type, the dominant function would be introversion, and Jung would predict that introversion and extroversion would be in opposite extremes of the model. And if you go back to the model, that hexagon figure that connects the different aura types, you'll see that the conjurer and the emitter are opposites of each other, as Jung would predict. And I found that extremely interesting. So, in the case of Kurapika specifically, he would be an introverted thinker. His dominant Jungian function would be thinking, and he directs his libido predominantly towards the inside, therefore, introverted thinker. Next, we have the manipulator. The water test would show that the leaf moves on the water's surface. These characters can control living or non-living things. In terms of personality, they are argumentative, stubborn, and logical, and they advance at their own pace. In terms of the Jungian psychological type, their dominant function would be thinking. In the specific case of Zushi, who is a manipulator, he's extroverted. So his Jungian type would be extroverted thinker. And then we have the specialist. In the water test, we see a completely different change from the ones mentioned before. Same thing in terms of abilities. They do not belong to any of the other 5 categories mentioned before. In terms of personality, they are independent and charismatic, always surrounded by many people. And their Jungian type, the predominant function would be intuition. In the specific case of Krollo, Lucifer, he is an introvert, so he would be an intuitive introvert. So here you see how Togashi's model of the types of aura is very close to Jung's own theory of psychological types, both in structure and dynamics, so much so that the types that each model defines or predicts overlap each other or map each other. And I think having this model throughout the series gave the story and the characters a great psychological depth and also psychological consistency. And it's one of the things that not only sets the series apart from other shonen series, but sets the series apart from most of what's out there. I mean, the psychological consistency and depth of this series is something else. So I'll continue the series of videos next week talking about the psychology of the Chimera Ants arc, and hopefully you'll follow that one and find it interesting. And as usual, thank you for your time.